left behind. So, I don't know what it's like where you are. It's quite chilly around here, so it always takes a little while, I think, for us to kind of adjust to a change in temperature. So, as always, caution as you start to move. Just check your feet, hip width apart, and either pointing straight forwards or slightly turned out. And if you can comfortably keep this feeling.
Can you do that? Because I'm not doing very well.
Exaggerated, of course. I tell you what, I haven't done. I haven't muted, have I? Let's mute you all. That's better. Yeah, so if I exaggerate the basic sort of posture, if I bring my weight forwards, then a natural response from my body is to sit back like that. Just be careful that you don't do the other common response, which is to do this, which is to pull your shoulders back. It's your hips going back, and that just gives you that slight sense of dropping. And we'll come back to that in a few moments, but just as much as possible in that posture to give you this looser feeling in the middle of your body, and a feeling of your weight and the straining in your body beginning to sort of melt, dissolve downwards. Nice and loose in your shoulders. So as always, we can use a variety of ideas and a variety of images to help us with any of these aspects of Tai Chi. So one of the ones I quite like, I think possibly because I made it up myself, or if I didn't, I heard it a long time ago, it's just this idea of allowing your pelvis to hang. I quite like the idea that a friend of mine had, which is, he said that he called it the teddy bear posture. You know how teddy bears' legs seem to go right up their sides, and it's that feeling that somehow your legs are going upwards and your pelvis is dropping down. And all these images and ideas carry something with them, give you a slightly different perspective. One thing that this posture does help with is to stabilize your knees. There's always a certain amount of sideways movement. Again, you can see I'm exaggerating there. And coming into this slightly curved posture just engages the muscles of the legs a bit more strongly. The other thing to think about in terms of the alignment of your knees, remember we want to keep our knees pointing in the same direction as our toes. I come forwards just a little bit, see my toes, but it's natural when I turn for my knee to turn inwards. And then sometimes what we do is, of course, is this, for some of the movements. But for this posture to stay stable, what you want to do is, as you turn in, you can see I'm exaggerating. What I do is I push my knee forwards and out. So I'm using these muscles here and stretching the muscles on the inside of the leg. And that keeps the knee in place. And the idea is not to do 1, 2, but to try and do both at once. So the effect is a bit like if you see somebody swimming in a river and they're staying still, it means that they're swimming into the current at the same speed as the current is pushing them back. And this is just something you want to every now and then think about. If you get too fixed on any of these details, they just dominate everything and you can't think of anything else. But every now and then, just check your knees. Another image sometimes used is as though you're holding a ball between your thighs. So various ways that people have to sort of try and encourage the body into line. One of the interesting things that this idea of rotating outwards offers is that you become aware that even though from the outside, your legs are completely still. Actually, you can feel this sort of spiraling movement going down from your hips into your feet. And then just raising your arm. And let your hands drop. Give your feet a shake. So just rocking your weight forwards and backwards. Now, again, if I exaggerate, obviously if I go a long way forwards, then eventually I'm in this position of straining against the pull of gravity, same thing going back. So just get a sense for how far you can move without that happening. Imagine you're standing in water, so that when you go forwards, you just use the image to encourage your body to move as though it were just leaning forward slightly into water. And then same thing with the back as you go back. So we just observe what the body does. Hands out to your sides so your arms can follow. It's a difficult balance to find between allowing your body to move in a way that's natural and actually, if you like, instructing your body to move in a particular way. We don't want to interfere too much, but we have to realize that quite often we're moving in a particular way because one way or another we've been sort of conditioned into that, maybe an injury or something that happened to us, or just we haven't thought very much about our posture, so we've accumulated habits. So it's a combination of this observation of the movement and an awareness of how that feels, the effect it has on your body and how your body adjusts, and deliberately changing things. So cultivation is the term that I rather like, because it's a bit like if you want to sort of prune a rose bush, first of all you have to see how it's growing. Prune it according to the patterns that it's growing in. Nice and easy and gently, feeling how your body just naturally adjusts to the change in angle, the movement. Remember that image, if it works for you, of your pelvis hanging from your spine. So it feels like there's sort of like a bucket hanging in a well. The bucket moves and the spine, the rope goes with it. So your spine floating a little bit in your back. These are all things that we want to gradually build up, and chances are if you think about something it'll start to work, but then you think about something else and the first thing disappears for a while. Try not to get frustrated about that, it's quite normal. So somewhere there's a midpoint, a balance point, ideally somewhere between the middle and the ball of each foot. So this time, come to rest there, and instead of letting your whole body go back, just let your hips go back. So you sink down, bring your hands around as though you're cradling a ball, and push up. And sink down. When you go up, don't lock your knees, so stop just before your legs completely straighten. When you go down, don't force yourself down, just allow yourself to drop. And try not to go down so far that your knees start to stiffen up. And it's very much, again, I'll come a bit closer, very much your hips going back, not your knees going forwards. So it's very strong in the muscles of your legs, and as always, take care. And what's actually happening is, as you go up, there's a certain momentum that comes from the push up. And eventually that dies away and gravity takes over and pulls you down. And going down, the resilience, the springiness in your body, particularly your legs, eventually overcomes the pull of gravity like a ball bouncing off the ground. So the rhythm and the range of the movement eventually becomes self-regulating. You don't have to think, oh, is it time to go down or time to come up? If you're paying attention, you'll feel that little bit of a change as the pressure in your legs grows, and eventually it's just natural to come up. So it feels as though it's all happening automatically. You might even feel that there's a bit of a response right down into the soles of your feet, and even the ground beneath you. It can make a difference sometimes what you're standing on or what you're wearing on your feet and so on. So we get this idea of a movement, an energy that comes up from the ground through your legs, fills the body, and then just drains away. Now, although I don't put a lot of emphasis on the breathing, just try a couple of times. As you push up, you breathe in, and as you sink down, you breathe out. Don't feel you have to hold that rhythm for a long time, just for a couple of times. And the overall effect between those two movements, the movement up from your legs and your in-breath, is to give your body a sense of filling up and then emptying. So you fill up with a sort of fresher energy. But notice that your in-breath, for instance, is a little bit cooler than the out-breath. So if we think in energetic terms, you're filling with a fresher, clearer energy and releasing through your out-breath, and as you sink down, it's draining away the slightly more sort of stagnant, as we would term it, energy, rejuvenating, energizing process. This is one of the reasons why, if we feel a little bit tired, sometimes moving appropriately can actually help to refresh us. It's anti-intuitive, I think, to start off with that idea. But sometimes the tiredness is just due to the build-up of carbon dioxide, build-up of this stagnant energy within the body. So now, change into the wild goose. You may feel that you're sort of filling a little bit more fully, going up through your body a little bit more towards your solar plexus. So we want that sense of filling to really spread through our whole body. If you stiffen up, if you tighten, so for instance here, if your fingers are held tight, which is not uncommon, then that will block that process. Or if you're holding a bit of your back tight. But the other side of that coin is that if we do identify those areas that are a bit stiff or a bit blocked, then focusing on that sense of filling and emptying, expanding and contracting if you prefer, maybe a way of just encouraging those areas to soften up a little bit. And then change into parting the clouds. And again, we feel the expansion, the filling a little bit higher in the body. So another thing that helps is to work with particular areas of the body, if we feel that's appropriate, is by identifying those exercises that seem to work most fully in those areas. They will all of them work through the whole body, but obviously different movements create different responses within our body. that can be quite a personal thing. So again, if you suddenly think, oh, this is actually quite nice on my shoulders, then lucky old you. That's a good thing. It does mean that some other time when your shoulders are a bit tight, you might feel this is a good exercise to do. That's what you feel here. So now change into Dragon Plucks the Stars from the Sky. So at the moment I'm doing this with a very sort of visible movement up and down in my hips. I push up into the shoulder, that moves my arm. Same as with the previous 3 exercises. What you can do is, if you want to feel a slightly different element, different aspect of this movement, and all the movements really, is make that particular movement in your hips smaller. Until eventually there's nothing visible there. You're just in this basic rooted position that I described earlier. But of course, going back to that filling and emptying, that sinking down and pushing up, the sinking down is your body yielding, allowing gravity to pull it down. The push up is your body's response to that springy resilience coming through your body. And even if your hips aren't actively moving up and down, internally that will still be happening. So this slowing down, this reducing of the movement in your hips, the up and down movement of your hips, can help you to focus your attention more fully on what's happening within the body. This isn't necessarily inherently more advanced. It's just a different aspect of it. There are internal and external views of all of these movements. Gravity will always be pulling you down, and your body will always have a response to that. So nothing different to what anybody else does, really. It's just we become more aware of it. Let's do this one more time. So now, just a single movement to begin with. With this one, your hips just stay back slightly. They don't go up and down. So as your hips go down, your back lengthens. Contracts. And then alternate that with the sideways push. So when I talk about the slightly different responses within our body to different movements, this is a good way of just helping you to become aware of that, because you've got 2 very similar movements, just slightly different. And so it can feel slightly different quite often in your back. Obviously, there's also a lot of common ground. The driving force is this sinking down and pushing up. Again, if your breathing is a good thing for you to work with, you could also, every now and then at least, match it with your breathing in and out. Now, just staying with the sideways movement, push out and turn. So we get a change of pattern now by turning in our hips and center and back. And the other way. So two things to be mindful of, to be aware of as you're doing this. One is that when you turn, you need to make sure that you're not twisting your back or straining in your back, because that will block those movements that you noticed earlier. And that you're not moving too far, because that will do the same thing. The other is the significance of that center part of our body. It's almost like the up and down movement that I described earlier gets kind of spiraled around the center and gets redirected around the center. And this is, again, something that we find in really all of the exercises in one way or another. So now putting those four movements together. And our hands coming back and down, bring our attention back to that center part of the body. So if this is too much information, don't bother about it. But earlier, I talked about how we feel that little bit of movement in our legs sometimes as the center turns. You're not going to feel it here because there's no rotation in the center of your body. But with these two middle movements, it does mean that just a little bit of movement in your hips and your center, it is only a small movement, sort of resonates not only up through into your arms and your hands, but down into your feet as well. So we begin to appreciate how significant both that idea of the physical center of your body, your hips and your waist is, but also perhaps a slightly more abstract image, idea of the center, which extends down into your feet as well. We push out from there, extend out from there, and draw back. One more round. And then change to circling palms. And again, the hand moves out from the center and then straight down. And then, if it's comfortable for you, you turn just a little bit and that changes the position of your arm. And then switch sides. And again, if it's comfortable, bearing in mind it is quite a strong movement, turning. Now, just go back to this movement. The start of the class, I said, if we lean forwards, then one of the responses that our body might make, and the response that we want it to make, is that our hips go back. It's like a dog when it's having to pull it along, it drops its haunches back. Another effect of that, of course, is to bring our head upright so that we actually don't have to strain in our shoulders or our neck or our back to come upright, but rather, again, use this yielding to the pull of gravity to do that. Once again, recognizing an important aspect to this central part of the body. So this time, exaggerate that. Tilt forward, so your pelvis tilts forwards, and then just let gravity pull your hips back. Feel how your shoulders come up, and then push up. Don't worry if this happens. That's almost inevitable. It takes a while to build this. What will stop that happening is simply allowing the pelvis to adjust. Because the correct angle of your pelvis will sort of focus your weight in the correct place. And then rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. One more time. And this time, just stand and see if maybe only for a few moments you can get that sense of standing without straining, because you don't need to strain, in theory at least. And it can feel quite unusual, it can feel quite unsettling. You can feel as though you're hunched over. You might even feel as though you're likely to fall, because it is an unusual feeling. But just try and recognize that there is a structure, a strength within your body. It gets kind of revealed by this process. then shake out. One of the old writings in Tai Chi describes this center part of the body as being like the banner of an army, and our mind, our awareness, like the commander of the army, directing the banner. So there's a sort of dialogue, if you like, between what we think of as the mind, and we tend to think of the mind in the head, and the banner, the center of the body. So it becomes an increasingly important area to focus on. And as I said earlier, we can think of it as the physical area, but sometimes I use the term center not just about the physical area, about a concept almost that extends down into the feet, and about drawing our attention back. So this idea of just drawing back from whatever coalface where we feel we're up against. So from a meditational point of view, this is also a very useful part of the body to focus on, because it means that in those moments when we're standing in a queue, or the bus is late, or all these little things that affect us, we actually have if you like, a place we can bring our attention to just let go of the frustrations and the tightness that can come with that. So in all sorts of ways, the rhythm of the movement that really extends out from either the concept or the physical structure, if you like, of the center, depending on how you're thinking about it, and then returns you to it, has an impact right through the whole system, whichever, whether you're looking at the physical exercise or the meditation or the energetic or whatever, because this is also seen as being an important center for the energy. Those of you who have done Tai Chi forms will be familiar with a sense of what happens next. Forgetting the movement, or forgetting when it can happen with these very simple exercises as well. And the answer actually is a very simple one, that we recenter ourselves. We come back to an awareness of the physical center, the feet, and so on and so forth, rather than thinking, oh, is it this or is it that? And thereby avoiding the sort of flapping arms and, oh, I can't do this kind of thing that actually is a very common thing. And in a way, that's a sort of practice for dealing with those frustrations when you're standing in the queue or something like that. So now just side to side. It's only a very small movement. If I go too far, you'll see me leaning. In some ways, it's quite a difficult movement to demonstrate, because if I do it so you can see it, I'll do it wrong. So what I'm going to do actually for a few moments, I don't expect you to do this, is to do it in a wider stance. Now you can see my body moving. Another idea I like to play with, particularly when I'm moving the weight like this, is that I'm sort of straddling a ball. These big blue balls you get in gyms, and again, that fits in with this idea of the concept of the center, of course, because you're sitting on it and your legs are straddling it. And basically what you're doing is you're just rolling the ball from one side to another. It can also give you an idea of going back to that sinking down and pushing up, that springiness. If you were to sit on a ball, you'd feel it pushing you up. And then if you move across and you turn the ball, your body will turn. I'm going to do an exercise that's going to be new for some of you, using this movement. So if your legs are okay, then feel free to try it in this wider stance, but don't feel that you have to. You won't get very much movement. You only go to about 60% of your weight in each leg. Just hold your hand in front of you, and let your hand follow the movement. So I suggest as you watch that you use your right hand so you can mirror my movements. It's almost like you're painting a line. So your fingers are like the paintbrush. And then this time, come around, and as you turn, just use that movement to swing your hand up to just below shoulder height, and then across and down. So now you're painting a circle or an oval. And you'll find that your arm naturally rotates at a certain point, just as if you were using the brush. One of the images traditionally used for this is the calligraphy brush or the painting brush. So if you're that way inclined, that may help. This is the first of a series of exercises called silk reeling. With these winding movements, these rotating movements, I said to sort of emulate the action needed to wind up silk thread or cotton thread. So we move across and we rotate, we spiral in the middle of the body. We may feel again that countering spiral in our legs. And we have a spiraling movement through the arm. Try and hold your fingers soft, not stiff, slightly curved. And then with your left hand, so I'm using my right hand first of all, as though you're just painting a line. You can even add the turning in there if you wish, or you could just do it like this. And then you go across and you turn, and the turn seems to just swing your arm up. Something to think about as you get used to doing this is the position of your arm. If you look at my arm, what I'm not doing is this. I'm not pulling my arm across my body and swinging it out. I go across and I turn. My hand's sort of in front of the center line of my body. I go across, I'll exaggerate, I turn, and it's still there. So again, if I do this from the side, I go into here. If you see there, I've exaggerated this, so I'm a bit twisted over, but my hand's still there. It hasn't gone out there somewhere. Even though, and I know it looks like that from the front, but it's all in the body. Your arms, your hands stay what we would term very quiet. Now this time, as the left hand comes up, bring your right hand back into the movement, and then cross over as you rotate on one leg and you go across into your right, and as your body begins to rotate, your hands cross over. This is wave hands like clouds, or wave hands in the clouds sometimes. It's a movement taken from the Tai Chi forms that we practice. And it's a movement that really encourages a focusing of our attention into that center part of our body. When you get to a point where you feel as though your arms are sort of what I would term flapping around, just let your shoulders relax, bring your attention back to here, middle part of your body, feel the connection from your hips to your shoulders, from your shoulders to your hands, and let those connections work for you. and then just let your hands drop. Give them to shake. Wave hands like clouds. A long-term effect, I feel, for this returning to our centre all the time. So one of the benefits of sometimes finding yourself doing an exercise that makes you work a little bit harder at doing that is that return to the centre helps to reduce an accumulation of stress and tension in our lives. One of the things that can often happen to us, and happens to us just on a daily basis, one way or another, is that we trigger an adrenaline reaction for some reason or another. You're walking down the road and a car bigs its horn, you jump. Because that's what it's meant. That's what it's meant to do, and that's just the triggering of the adrenaline cycle through the body. In an ideal world, that cycle would just dissipate within a minute or so. It doesn't last very long. But the problem is it gets re-triggered over and over again, maybe because you're thinking about it or because something else happens. And so gradually the negative effects of that adrenaline cycle, the fight or flight mechanism that takes blood and energy away from the digestive system and sort of makes us tense up and so on and so forth, just kind of build up. So we can almost get to a point where we're constantly kind of on the edge of that fight or flight process, which we don't need to be, hopefully, most of the time. But we can interrupt that re-triggering of the adrenaline system by bringing our attention back to our centre, by not thinking about it if you like. That's a slightly crude way of putting it, but we can think, oh God, that car horn really frightened me. Oh, I hope it doesn't do it again. And each time we do that, the hind part of the brain, which is very primitive, kind of re-triggers it. So what we can do is to escape that frustration of standing in the queue and so on and so forth by simply recentering ourselves on a regular basis and avoiding not the actual triggering of the cycle, because it's just a natural thing. It's like breathing, but avoiding the negative effects building up. I think it's one of the long-term benefits of the practice. So now, 1 foot forwards, hip width across your feet, about the same or a little bit longer in length, and transfer your weight. Again, the image of sitting on a ball is helpful to you. Use that. And if earlier you began to feel that idea of the legs pushing you up, then again, rather than thinking, go forward or go back, you go forward, you settle down, and then you feel the push, and you just allow it to push you back. Don't get too concerned with the angle of your upper body. If you can, maintain the angle looking straight ahead, but if it's slightly angled, then that's not a problem. And remember, if you do try and adjust that, you might affect your knees, so all of that's got to be taken into account. But also recognize that you can change. When you go into the back foot, you can turn towards the back foot. When you go into the front foot, you can do the same. So again, we feel that connection, feet, legs, hips and waist working together. This tends to be the easier way of doing it to begin with. But we can also turn the opposite way after a while. We won't turn as far. And this is where we cultivate something different. Our body will naturally turn towards the back foot, but we just gently ease around. So these two movements between us, the transfer of the weight and the rotation in the center, can actually give us quite a range of movement from here to here and subsequently quite a range of movement with our arms and our hands. You may also find that in turning, it actually helps you to raise your toes and your heel. Because obviously there's a physical link between your hip and your ankle and your toes. And if turning this way is going to pull this knee in, then one way I can avoid the knee being pulled out of line is to let the foot move. So then we begin to step. We realize that the center part of our body has a role to play in helping us to take the step. Shake out. We do this anyway, don't we? When we walk along, we tend to sort of swing a little bit, but just doing it slowly, of course, is always going to give us a slightly different perspective. So on the other side, and first of all, just without any deliberate turning. And then just play around with it. Sometimes turn towards the foot that you're moving towards. So when you go to the front foot, you'll end up facing forwards. When you go onto the back foot, you're at a slight angle. And then sometimes the other way. We use both movements one way or another in these different exercises. So any ideas about our posture and the alignment of our body and so on and so forth shouldn't be seen as being rigid instructions. We're not rigid machines. We're more supple and flexible than that, although you may have to work a little bit on that suppleness. And then raising your toes and your heel. Turning either way, in my experience, will help to move the foot. You can decide for yourself which is more appropriate at this point. So again, our intent, our instruction, if you like, on our minds is to begin to move the foot. The instruction goes to the center turns, moves the foot for you. And then stepping in. Mind is the commander, waist is the banner. And shake it. In the Chinese systems, this area between hips and waist is referred to as the lower Dan Qian. Again, don't get too sort of focused on it being one particular place. Like a lot of these things, as I've said before, depending on the context, sometimes it's referred to as a particular point in that area, sometimes as the whole area, sometimes even beyond that. But Danqian means field of energy or field of elixir. So it's the place where the energy is said to be stored. So now, first foot forwards, and fisherman cast a net. So again, the movement, the energy spreads out from the center of your body, from your feet, into your arms, your fingertips, and draws back in, extends out again, draws back in. So your arms pass through the center of your body. And see that as they do that, whether just for a split second, you can really get a sense of the full weight of your arms, because they are quite heavy. But we're often quite reluctant to let our arms drop all the way down. And then pushing a wave. One more time. Good. On the other side, fisherman cast a net. And pushing a wave. One more time. And then bring your feet back. And shake. Just swinging your arms around. This is a good exercise for really helping you to focus on the center of your body. It's very, very simple. And remember, when we do movements like this, the more we trigger a particular neural pathway, then if the neuroscientists are correct, the more usable, the more accessible that pathway becomes. What was the phrase came across from one neuroscientist? Neurons that fire together wire together. So it's possible that we're having a very real effect on the nervous system. Shake out, making it perhaps more likely that we're going to be able to find that quieter space, if you like to think of it like that, in those moments when we need it, because it's an established act. It's like if you go into your kitchen, you don't need to sort of think too much about how you're going to lift the kettle up because you do it all the time. On the other hand, if you went into a kitchen that you weren't familiar with, and I suppose you've done it, you tend to, oh, no, the kettle's not there, then you have to think about it. But if you're familiar with the pattern, and that pattern's been kind of hardwired into your system, then it just happens and you're chatting to somebody, you're not having to think about it at all. So this notion of centering, if we want to think of it like that, becomes just part of how we behave, I suppose you could say. So, just rubbing your hands together. And tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. One shoulder. Side. The back. And your hips. Your legs. Nice and light on your belly. So embracing tiger, return to the mountain, encompasses that idea of coming back to your center. One of the reasons I always like to close classes with it, so that we finish the session with a real sense of what the term means. It's just a meaningless word without the physical experience of it. So back to the parallel stance, hips dropping back, 4 stages. And again, if you want to try this with your breathing, take a breath in as you push up. Breathe out as you wrap your hands around holding the ball. Breathe in, drawing your hands in, and then sinking and breathing out. Nice and gently. And again, don't be in a hurry to push up, extend out. Enjoy those few moments of just being calm and still. And just wait until you feel the legs beginning to push up again. And feel how the pull of gravity naturally draws you back. One more time. And stand. Shake out. That went very quickly for me. Hope it didn't go too quickly for you. So, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you next week.
Bye.